Every single year, the Oxford University Press name the children's word of the year. We often have word of the year, and it's often, frankly, a word that none of us have ever heard of, something to do with IT. The poll began in 2014, and there were times when it was things like minion or bro or things like that. Like, some quite fun words because children's lives were fun and carefree. But now, no, it's not. The word of the year, by the way, not even a word, it's a phrase, for the past year, is, really tragically, for children, climate change. Second choice was war, and the third was coronation, of course, another event. But basically, since this was started, the results have become increasingly serious. And I wonder if it's because, actually, we are imposing far too much of the world's woes and a lot of the world's made-up woes on our children. They're constantly told about sort of how terrible the world is. Many children say they're never even going to have kids in the future because they think the world's going to end before they reach adulthood or soon into it. Because this is what a lot of frankly, the ideological lunatics, particularly behind the net zero mafia, are telling them. Well, joining me right now is economist and political theorist at Webster University in Vienna, Ralph Schoellhammer, always backed by popular demand. Good afternoon to you, Ralph.
Good to see you, Julia. You humble me, but it's great to be back.
Very great to have you back. Now, I mean, you and I have been talking about this a number of times on the show about, about climate change and the propaganda that goes out on this, and a lot of the stuff that is simply not backed up by the science from serious people who are genuinely worried about climate change. But it's the fact that children are worried about it. This all started with Greta Thunberg as their hero, was it not? But it's getting worse and worse, isn't it?
No, it's very sad. I mean, what we should promote in schools should be a message that encourages young people to be put in a position that they can contribute to a better life for themselves and to a better life around them. And let me give you a quick example, a wonderful story that I think we should tell school children. Many people don't know this, but towards the end of the 19th century, the world was faced with the prospect of imminent famine. But the reaction of the world was not to say, oh my God, we're all going to die, there's nothing we can do, and throw their hands up in the air. What they did was to say, okay, we need more food. So two Germans, an obscure Frenchman, and their English intern, and that's a true story, developed what is nowadays known as the Haber-Bosch process, which is artificial fertilizer, which feeds half the world. So most of your viewers and one of the two of us, Julia, wouldn't be here without that process. But the point is, there was a can-do spirit. And nowadays, we have a can't-do spirit. And that's really the problem. And we are promulgating that in schools.
Oh, 100%.
So instead of educating young people to be optimistic, to be energized, to be motivated for the future, we say, the future's going to be bad. You're going to be worse off than your parents. Of course,
no, we don't
young
even
people say, what's the
to,
point of it?
We don't even say you're going to be worse. We say you should be worse off than your parents, and that having heating and light when you need it, and being able to buy goods that you want and ship them around the world and things, that makes you a bad person. I mean, it is extraordinary, isn't it? And we should be telling children, look, okay, why don't you become a scientist or an engineer and come up with a solution to this problem? I mean, I'm all for carbon capture if they can make that work. Great, let's do that. Come up with a new energy. Let's give them prizes for that sort of stuff, as opposed to going, oh, aren't you wonderful? You took a day off school and truanted along with Greta Thunberg about a topic you know nothing. When my daughter's school, they and I totally massively argued against this. They allowed one day when on one of the Fridays when Greta Thunberg was off truanting, that the girls could all do that. And I'd said to the head teacher, I actually sent to her a quiz about climate change facts, which a scientist put together for me. Tell them if they can get like even 60% on this 10-question quiz right, then they can do it. But if they couldn't, odds were they didn't really know enough about the topic to care strongly about it. And unfortunately, it was a bit too late in the day for her to do this. But I reckon most of those girls would have struggled to get 10% right, because they all say, oh, it's terrible, the world's burning, the world's drowning, we're all going to die, we're going to be underwater in 20 years' time, there's going to be no snow, and we're going to be hot, and it's going to be very cold. I can never work out because it seems to be all of these things at the same time. And there's no point doing anything other than, curling up in your bed. That is a terrible message to send to our next generation.
No, it's not just a terrible message. I think it's a real problem. Let me give you a couple of examples, because you kind of mentioned the climate issue, but it goes, I believe, beyond that, which is there is almost a certain pleasure in the potential apocalypse. And we see this in,
Yes.
look at the newspapers. It's the climate apocalypse. World War III is around the corner. A new virus can emerge any day now and will kill half the population. I mean, I would say this kind of quote unquote desire for the apocalypse, which I think is partially driven, I say this every time, but I think it's so important to say that in many ways, particularly in the West, we have become so rich that parts of our society have become so bored that they want something dramatic just to give meaning to their life. And I think this, of course, also played into, for example, the reaction to the COVID pandemic. There was a lot of overreaction to it because for some reason there was this idea, this is now going to be it. This is the going to be all, end all, great challenge of the day, of the moment. And this is really a problem because, as you say, if you desire the end of times, if you kind of wish for the end state scenario, then of course you don't really have an interest in finding solutions for it.
Yeah.
And this have always been my main criticism about the environmental movement. I care about the environment as much as you do. I care about the climate as much as you do. What worries me is that those who push for it the hardest, that just stop oil and Fridays for Future group, they are not interested in solutions.
Yeah.
They want the pain, they want the suffering, as long as it excludes them, right? This is always the thing. They for themselves, of course,
they'll
they
go on.
privileges.
They'll still take their half-term ski flights, as indeed will I. But I think a lot of it's also down to the drama. Everything's dramatic now. If you see the news footage, it's always, historic. This is since records began. The records began 16 years ago. That sort of thing. Everything is always. It has to be. It's like we live in, apocalyptic, epoch-making times, as opposed to, yeah, okay. It's like even the pandemic. But there was another one 100 years ago. It's not that different. Our reaction to it was different, but it's not that different.
Yeah. No, and it's worse than this because, again, you put your finger on a very, very important cultural phenomenon. We live in such a present tense culture that whatever happens right now is always the most extreme. Again, every election is the most historic election. As you say, every year is the hottest year. It's always the most, the worst, the hardest, the toughest. And that is a problem because what this does, it blinds you for long-term thinking. So in many areas, from the economy to energy to migration, we really can no longer do strategic long-term thinking. We have a very hard time in Britain and in other countries to formulate a long-term national strategy because we're permanently trapped either in the present tense, or we say, we're going to do it in 2050 because every politician knows they're not going to be around in 2050.
Absolutely.
So we have really to relearn how to do policy. We have to relearn how to do governance. And that's, as you say, many of the things we talk about also on this show are very often symptoms of a kind of deeper cultural, psychological malaise that we have to probably explore much more.
I think you've absolutely nailed it. And again, if we're telling our children, everything's going to hell in a handcart and the world's not, the human beings are awful, the world's going to die, what is the point? And then we wonder why we've got a load of really depressed, miserable children. I hope next year their word of the year is fun, because that's what kids should be having. Ralph Schellhammer, always a pleasure to have you on the show, talking so much sense. Claire Pissell, you and I have both got teenagers. Look, this is a real concern. Kids are really unhappy.
Yeah, but I think that we've helped make them that way. And it was really interesting what you were saying about why not become a scientist and come up with a solution. My son is into cars and he doesn't want to drive an electric car. He wants a proper car.
Good for him.
And he wants to come up with an alternative fuel that works properly.